All right, how's everybody doing today? I've got a little bit of changes. This is our second Ask Him video here. We will be doing these every single week, unless I am out. I actually will be taking a vacation soon with the wife. We're just going to a little place here in Indiana. I know it's not that far, but still, just a little getaway. Which will be in a couple of weeks here. So, but under normal circumstances, we will be doing these regularly. I'm going to be trying to do them Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. If I don't have too much going on, we're getting a lot of good questions, then we're going to go longer. So that's kind of the plan here. At the bottom here, you can see, right here, you can go to asktim.th3dstudio.com, and that will take you to the page that's got the Teams Conference ID and the other information if you want to call in. So you can either call in with a phone if you're old school, or if you've got a computer with a webcam, or at the very least microphone and headphones. If you are going to join in through your computer, please use headphones, because we don't want to get feedback. So if we go to the screen here, you'll see apparently I still have that I still have this camera up from the previous stream I did. So you can click here to join through Teams directly if you're on a computer or a mobile phone like an iPhone or an Android phone, or if you click this, it'll actually dial the number. But I also have the number listed here for this current one, and I'll keep this page updated for whatever stream is currently happening, because that number and conference ID may change. We were using Discord, but Discord is honestly too much of a mess, and I want to keep it simple. So one way of actually getting in here and asking questions, and that's through either the phone number with the conference ID, or you can click through the Teams conference. So until we get somebody in here, I am in right now. So whenever I get a caller in, it'll pop up, and then I will admit them. Anybody that decides to be a troll or whatever, you're just gonna get blocked. It's that simple. So, or maybe I'll screw with you. I don't know. So while we're waiting, I did officially push out the new Unified 2 2.1 version release. And if I actually go to our GitHub here, main monitor, let's see here. So it's on our website, it's on the Easy Firmware site, but we do maintain a GitHub here. So these are all the things that have been fixed and added or changed. So we've got on printer boards that have the memory available, the PID auto tune menu, and the PID edit menu from the LCD are there. You can always do it over G-code commands. And if you want to know how to do G-code commands, you can just do PHDD PID tune, and we have a guide here on our site on how to do that with G-code. We fixed the manual mesh leveling. The SDN knit fail on boot is gone. We had Ender Extender 300 size option to the firmware for the Easy board, and then we moved around some of the config menus, so the EEPROM reset is on the main page instead of in a sub menu. And then we also renamed it, so people are like, well, what's initialize? I don't find reset EEPROM, so we call it reset EEPROM. I like that better. Just a few other things, and we updated to Marlin 2.0.7. And I've been using it on this little machine here, and it's been pretty reliable. So let me switch back over. It looks like I got John here. Let's see if I can pull John in. Hopefully John can hear me. John, can you hear me? It looks like you're muted right now. You're probably going to have to unmute yourself.
I can hear you, yeah.
Hey, John, how's it going?
I'm good, thanks.
So what can I help you with today?
I was just looking at the. Am I on the live chat thing now? Because I was just on there, and then I got let in here.
Oh yeah, yeah, and make sure you mute the stream too, so I don't get any feedback here. There's about a 30-second delay between the stream. So yeah, I see in the chat here. Let's see. Okay, yeah, I see your question here. So I read somewhere that a 32-bit board means faster printing. Is that really true? Because the hardware still needs to move at a given speed with melting, cooling going on. Explain. Yes, you are correct. So you're still going to hit physical limitations with the printer because you can only melt plastic so fast, and you have the physical machine can only speed up and slow down so quickly. Otherwise, you start losing steps or you get ringing, that kind of stuff.
Right.
Where the 32-bit really comes into play is as you're getting into more advanced features on the board, like Marlin has like linear advance function that requires a lot more CPU horsepower to actually process because it's doing decoupling of the extruder from the other axes to get a little more accurate printing. Some of the 8-bit boards, when you start throwing all those features in, they start slowing down even at like 60 to 80 millimeter second print speeds. And it really depends on what you're printing too. If you're printing more simple objects that are flat sides, not a lot of facets, not a lot of faces on the model, meaning there's just simpler moves like, from X20 to X100, it's just a straight line versus more organic models where they're going to have multiple different paths. Some of the 8-bit boards can choke on that, especially if you're going over USB. Now, one of the things with the 32-bit boards is because they typically have more memory, more processing power, and more RAM, you can run a higher buffer size in the firmware. So when you're doing a USB print, it has more information in memory for the moves, meaning it doesn't run out of them. A lot of the 8-bit boards, you can't run as big of a buffer size for USB printing. So it'll end up slowing down and you'll get these pauses where the printhead stops moving. And what happens is because there's pressure behind that nozzle still, you get these little blobs on your prints. So that's like the main benefit is being able to actually turn on all of the features. I see they're saying I'm kind of quiet in chat. Let me turn my gain up here a little bit. So as you start turning on more and more features, it's obviously loading the processor down more, and you have a lot more overhead on the 32-bit ones. We're barely even utilizing the 32-bit processors on these boards, even on the slower ones. We're going from 8-bit 16 megahertz chips. On average, it's usually what the Atmels are. They're usually 8-bit 16 megahertz speed. They do vary, but typically most of the boards are 16 megahertz. With like the Easy board, we got an LPC processor on there. That's 120 megahertz 32-bit ARM processor. So that's a big jump in the actual horsepower it has.
So if you recommend a 32-bit board for, let's say, an Ender 5, which is what I have, what would be a recommendation?
So I mean, here's the reality for your average printer. For your average person just printing day-to-day objects, there's not going to be a huge night and day difference between the 8-bit and the 32-bit board in terms of the actual print quality. If you're just using basic functions, you're not doing anything fancy with the extra settings in the firmware or new features coming out, that kind of stuff, you're not going to see a huge difference. But the 32-bit boards are going to give you more overhead for when the new stuff comes to Marlin. So when, let's say, the Marlin dev team, they come out with this awesome new feature, but it needs a lot more processing power that the 8-bit boards don't have, you can then just update the firmware to get more features on your printer. And there's been some stuff that they put into Marlin 2 that just simply doesn't run well or at all on the 8-bit boards, and you usually have to make compromises with, okay, well, if I want this feature, I got to turn this one off because otherwise the processor's just not going to be able to handle it, that kind of stuff. So, but for boards, it really depends on what you're looking for. Like our Easy board is just literally a drop-in replacement. You just swap it out. I mean, I had a customer of ours call me the other day. Him and I've been working with him for like 3 years. He's one of our original customers, and he just got the Easy board. And he sent me a text because he was like, I can't believe how quick this went in. He said from start to finish, it took him 45 minutes, including doing the firmware, when he swapped it out on a CR10. Oh, did I lose you? Hello?
Nope.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, so I mean, what are you looking to get out of the upgrade? Like, what problem are you trying to solve? What features are you looking for that you don't currently have?
Nothing in general. I mean, I'm kind of still in the beginner stages, but I have done a few upgrades. I'm using your firmware now, which I'm very happy with, and that's kind of what I'm thinking is, I just watched your video from yesterday, I think, where you talked about, or was it earlier today, where you talked about the new builds, and I want to keep up to date with that. And then, you went into detail about the memory. for usage and stuff like that. And I'm a programmer, so I get all of that stuff. So I'm kind of wondering, that's why my question is, is it's not weighted one way or the other. I know the physical limitations, I know programming, and I know stuff like that. But what am I? That was my question. What would I get out of it? And your answer is pretty good. But what I really want to get out of it is just pushing boundaries. That's all. Like, because I'm curious. I like to tinker, and I kind of doing this as part of my business as well. So it's like, not that money's not an object, but it would be a business expense. So
I totally understand.
Without having to worry about like, can I afford this? It's just like, it's going to be a solid investment in that sense.
Yeah. So I mean, like, one of the things is like, most of like our print firm, we don't print fast. We try to go for more quality. So we're only running like 40 to 60 millimeters a second. So a lot of our machines actually have 8-bit boards. But a lot of my machines here in my office, where I am doing more advanced stuff, I'm printing faster, I'm playing with settings, I do have 32-bit boards in most of the machines in here, because a good example is, we were at ERF, and we had our Ender 3 here, and it had it has our Easy board in it. And one of the things that I couldn't do with the 8-bit board is, just for, even for fun, just crank up the feed rate to see how fast I could actually get the printer to print. And with the 8-bit board, at a certain point, especially because I'm printing over USB from Octoprint, the 8-bit boards would just start choking. They'd start doing that pausing thing. And whereas with the 32-bit board, with the Easy board, because I am able to set those bigger buffer sizes, so it has that larger command queue to look ahead. And if for some reason the serial data gets interrupted going from Octoprint over the USB to the printer board, it's got more stored up, and it doesn't do that pause thing. There's actually a video on our channel talking about the serial data issues with Octoprint. But I am able to push it faster, but you do get, like you said, the limitations with the actual physical printer. How fast can you actually melt the plastic, and what are you printing too? Because there's certain parts, like I have machines set up here that have larger nozzles. They've got like the volcano style blocks on them, the 50-watt heaters, and I typically run our tough extruder, which is based on the Titan design, and that's the geared one. And sometimes I'm printing a part that just needs to be functional, and I need it quickly, so I'll run it at a higher layer height, I'll run it at a higher speed, and it may not look as pretty, but it's a functional part. So that's also like, you got to kind of balance that out. And I do feel like you do get more headroom to go faster with the 32-bit boards, whereas 8-bit boards, things just start slowing down because it's can't process the data as fast as the 32-bit one, especially when you start getting into the more advanced features in the firmware. Like there's S-curve acceleration, which is a new thing that Marlin came out with. I want to say, I don't know if it was a year ago, but it's a relatively new feature. But it does require more CPU processing power, and the 8-bit boards can run it, but when you start pushing the speed up, they do start choking and slowing down. Whereas the 32-bit ones, they just don't care. When I checked on the processor, we're barely utilizing like 25% of the processor, even at high print speeds. So it's just having that headroom. I mean, if you got the money, like our Easy board is legitimately a really good board. Obviously, I'm a little biased, but if you just want something that you want to put in there and work, and you can actually use it instead of fiddling around with firmware and all that other stuff, like we've obviously put all the time into getting it running correctly and making sure things actually work. That's what's actually in this machine here sitting next to me, and that's why I literally have this printer just for testing out to make sure all the firmware stuff works on here before we push things out.
Yeah, I really like your guys' firmware. I upgraded because I added a BL Touch, and the original firmware for the Enders. Not only do they don't make it easy to find the right file, because I went on there, I did like everybody else after I watched the YouTube video that those guys made, and there's lots of people that still don't have questions answered. In terms of, I'm doing this, the thing went off the end, and they pressed a pin. Oh, you need this firmware. It's like it wasn't that obvious. It was hidden away in another folder. But when I went over to your guys' firmware, I tried it and I liked it, and I compiled it myself, and I realized I can figure it out and play with it as well. But I think with the 8-bit board, I'm probably at the limits of what I can get, just because the memory is is jam packed in with your guys' firmware. Unless I want to add something else like a sensor or whatever, and then I'm still pushing the limits. But so that's what I want to think about is like, what can I get? How can I get beyond that limit? And that's why I'm thinking 32-bit board. And
Yeah,
yeah, appreciate
and
your answer.
and like I was, I assume you caught the one where it was just like a random stream I did yesterday talking about like the firmware and the compile sizes. Um, uh, like even with the downfalls of the Creality boards, if you're gonna get a 32-bit board, I would go with the Creality one over the Big Tree Tech just because of the extra memory. And I did actually speak with Scott about the the compile sizes on the STM32s versus the LPCs, and his short answer was basically the LPC is just the code for the LPC for Marlin is more mature and it's better optimized, whereas the STM32, because these boards came out before firmware was really even ready for them, it's just kind of been hacked together, and maybe it'll get optimized later down the road. But that's one of the reasons we went with the LPC for our board over the STM32s, even though STM32s are about half the price, was the fact that the software from the community for those chips, they're much more mature, they're better optimized. And from a technical standpoint, the LPCs have more 5-volt tolerant pins than the STM32s, so they're a little more resilient to people hooking things up incorrectly. They're not flawless. We've had people that have damaged their board just like any other board. But I do think just because of the Marlin code itself, which is what we obviously rely on, being more mature for that chip, that's why we went with it, because we didn't want to be dealing with like the STM32s where it's kind of like they got a lot working now, but the code's not very well optimized, and just the size of the compiled code that speaks to that is the case right now. It may change later on, or maybe it doesn't. We don't know, and I'm not putting effort into the STM32s and optimizing that because I don't have any boards for it, and that's honestly above my pay grade. Is I'm not familiar with developing for those chips. I'm more familiar with doing the LPC stuff. They're slightly different. They're both ARM chips, but the code is a little bit different for them for the hardware abstraction layer. So.
Yeah, cool. One last question. So, are you running Octoprint on a Raspberry Pi, or how's your setup?
Yeah, so we have Octoprint on a Raspberry Pi, 1 Pi for each machine. There are some people that you can hack the firmware the software, whatever you want to call it, the Octoprint code, to run more than one printer off of 1 Pi. But my experience with that has been that while it does work for a while, you get weird inconsistencies, and it's not as reliable as just having a Pi for each printer. Especially as we're a business. It's not that much of a deal to spend the $60-$70 to get the hardware to put a Pi on each machine. We've got over 45 Raspberry Pis on our network here, so I think that's the way to go. There's some people too that said they use a Repetier server. My buddy has a small print farm of like 25 machines, and he actually used Repetier. He's got a license for that, and it's like Octoprint, but it's more geared towards commercial use. So there's not as many plugins and features and flexibility as Octoprint, but he's told me that he's had nothing but good luck with it, and he basically runs them all off of one x86 computer. So I think he's got like an i5 with a bunch of USB ports on it, and he plugs all the printers into that, so he's got one central location. I run all of our Raspberry Pis actually off of PoE injectors, so instead of having an AC adapter going into them or pulling off the printer power, we got a network cable that's run to each printer, and then it goes in this little box, and out of that box I get either USB-C and an Ethernet jack, or a micro USB and Ethernet jack, depending on what board we have, because we have a mix of 3Bs, 3B pluses, and even 4Bs. It really depends on when the printer was set up.
Yeah, I was thinking about running mine off of the power supply from the printer.
Yeah.
I bought the cabling and things to do that because I like to tinker, like I said. Any warnings about that?
Well, so like we have like a step down board with dual USB ports on it, and those work great for the 3B and the 3B pluses. But the Pi 4, while it will work off of it, it will trigger like the low voltage warning, which means it throttles the CPU down. So I don't recommend those with that. So if you're running a 4, I recommend trying to find like a higher amperage output step down converter and make sure you're using good quality cables. I do have some here that we're still testing. I'm still got to do more load testing, and I've got a couple installed in printers here just for longevity testing, and so far I haven't had any fail. But we will be having, I believe they're like 20 watts power delivery output that will be able to power a Raspberry Pi 4 no problem from printers PSU, but I don't have any, like we don't have those ready for sale yet. I'm still testing them because I don't want to be putting something out there that's like, oh, this looks good, and then I find out a month later they start dying, you know. But I mean, a 3B plus is more than enough to run Octoprint even with a camera. One thing to note when, in general, when you're running Octoprint, if you're using a USB camera like the Logitech's or like our EasyCam that we have a 1080p camera with a manual lens that's really nice. So you can actually adjust the focal point of where it's actually focusing. Whereas a lot of the autofocus ones don't like being focused close. Like the Logitech autofocus is terrible. If you've caught any of my streams when I use the one Logitech camera I have remaining, the autofocus does not work. And then you got the cheaper cameras where they're fixed focus and you can open them up and adjust it. But with our camera, you actually have direct access to the lens. But where I'm going with this is you want to use a USB one typically because when you run the Raspberry Pi camera, they are cheap. One thing I don't like is the ribbon cable is a pain to route, especially if you're mounting it to the printer's bed. So if you're doing a bed-mounted printer, the Raspberry Pi one's a pain because of that flex cable. And there are some adapters you can get where you can run it over HDMI. But then you're talking spending another $15, $20 on adapters and an HDMI cable, plus another $20 for the camera. You might as well have just bought a USB camera at that point. And because they're not hardware accelerated, the CPU on the Pi is now processing the image from the camera versus the USB cameras like the EasyCam we sell. They all have hardware encoding, so it's sending a compressed data stream to the Pi, so it doesn't have to encode that then for displaying your browser. So I'm a fan of doing the USB cameras because they are more efficient in terms of load on the Pi, and the cabling's a lot easier to route. You know, if you need a longer USB cable, you just pick up an extension. And it's just a USB cable. It's not anything hard to find.
I literally just did that yesterday. It actually arrived yesterday, and I hooked it up already. So I hear what you're saying.
Yeah. So I have two printers here that have Pi cameras on them. Or actually, sorry, I have one. Because I switched the other one over to the USB because I was having issues with the sensor going out, but it was like 3 years old. So they do last, but that ribbon cable, I will never go back to doing the Pi cameras. I have one printer, actually, it's my little purple one that's right above my shoulder here on the end. But that was like the second printer I built, so I was using the Pi cameras at that time, but I've since switched over to all USB cameras.
Cool. Do we have time for one more question?
Yeah, I'm surprised. Yesterday, like, it started getting very active, and I had people like queuing up in the waiting room. If you guys do want to jump in, just go to asktim.th3dstudio.com and it'll give you the info. So go ahead. You can go ahead, John.
Okay, so I was on your site probably yesterday after I hooked up my camera, and I was looking at because it's an Ender 5, it's got the saggy bed. And
yes.
I'm kind of like, I was, like I said, I've used your firmware to help me with leveling and all that kind of stuff with the BL Touch, and obviously I've been looking at your guys' what's it called, the sensor.
The Easy ABL.
Yeah, the alternative. So because like I said, I'm curious. I might want to try both. But anyway, so I was looking at that, but then I came across what I think is a kit that would level the bed or stop it from being like. So I think I read that you don't need the springs anymore because the springs are kind of getting me annoyed.
Yeah.
Well, can you talk about that a little bit? Because I did try looking at like what I need to order, and I did find your site a bit difficult in terms of what is it I need to choose from, the different drop downs you had, because there was too many options, and I wasn't quite clear on what it was I would need in order to to get the kit and make my bed probably more stable, I think is the goal of it.
Yeah. So it's just
anyway.
to get rid of that variation. So I got our store up here. So if you have the stream, you'll see it in about 20-30 seconds. Now, for the solid bed mounts, if you just go right to that product page, and I understand what you're getting at. We definitely do need to do a better job of communicating, because we don't even have the Ender 5. Oh, we do have it listed. So you can see here, like, just keeping all these descriptions up to date is a lot of work, especially with printers coming out every other week, it seems. But for the Ender 5, you would just do the standard kit, and you do not want to do the camera mount option, because we do have one that has a camera mount where it comes with this little arm. You'd want to just do the standard option here, which would be the strain relief with the rounds, and that would get rid of the springs. You can just tighten that down, and that will help stiffen it up. I know some people, because we've printed a few of them, there's like support arms you can print to put underneath the Ender 5's bed to keep it from sagging forward. Now, in our experience, we have 2 Ender 5s here. We do not have those supports on there, and it hasn't been far out of tolerance to where the ABL sensor can't compensate for it, but it wouldn't hurt to also do those arms underneath it. There's ones, let me look on here, Thingiverse. I'll show you what I mean, because there's a couple different ones. I'm sure if I search Ender 5 bed, it'll probably come up here. Yeah, so they're ones like this. They basically just go underneath the bed to prop it up a little bit, because it is cantilevered on there. So, but
well, I just ran the M48 test.
Mm-hmm.
The result was 0.001.
Okay.
Which I guess was good after listening to your video yesterday.
Yeah, 0.001 is really good.
But I still notice if I print on different parts of the bed, and this is why I'm thinking the leveling thing or the stiffening thing, is because certain parts of the bed, I think my bed might be a little bit warped. Maybe I need to switch to something flatter like the glass, because my magnetic thing, I know you said you hated it and I hate it too. Maybe it's past its usefulness. But anyway, so the reason I was looking at that was because it's very inconsistent printing, even with the BL Touch and even with that level of this M48. Certain parts of the bed are just, I can watch the nozzle move and I can see the gap forming even after these run, even after this test.
Is the Z moving?
Pardon?
Can you see the Z moving? Like the actual, if you look at the motor, especially the coupler is easy to spot. Can you see it moving while it's doing printing?
I don't see it moving. I just don't see it sticking well to the bed.
So the Z should be moving if you have your starting code set up correctly. It sounds like you might not have your starting code set up correctly. Now, for any ABL sensor, we do have a starting code for our probe, but it does work with other probes too. So if you just Google TH3D Easy ABL starting G code, might help if I spelled it right. Oh, Google. Try replacing your starting code with the one that's on our help center here. You can either just download the text file or just copy and paste the starting code and put that in your slicer. The important thing is you have to have you have your G28, obviously. We do 2 of them. We do a G28 and then a G28Z, so it'll home all, including Z and then Z again, and then we do a G29. And the G29 will take those measurements, and then the firmware will turn on the compensation. So G29 tells it to get a new mesh from the probe and then use that. So if you don't have a G29, meaning the probe takes the readings from the bed, goes around and, on the BL Touch, it'll move the bed on your printer, it'll move the bed down, deploy the pin, it'll bring it up, it'll touch it, it'll do it one more time, it'll do two readings in each spot, and it'll go and do, if you're using our stock settings, it'll do 9 points. And then after that, it's got that mesh. It puts a mesh in memory, and then it activates the auto bed leveling routine to use that mesh data it just got to compensate with the Z motor for that. So if you don't if your printer isn't doing those probes before it starts a print, then it's not going to engage, and you're basically just using your sensor as the end stop. Essentially, is what it's being used as. So I would double check that and make sure you don't have a G28 after a G29 either, because if you run a G28 and then a G29 and then another G28, it then turns the bed leveling off.
Okay. Now I have 28 and 29, but I don't have the one in the middle, G28Z.
That won't matter. That's just something we do to make sure that the Z position is absolutely perfect. It just rehomes it. But if your mesh is good, okay, and everything's set up, the G code's correct, the firmware's correct, what you'll see is while it's printing, you should see that Z motor moving even a little bit while it's moving around doing the print.
Okay.
So one other thing you can do too is do a G28 and then a G29, and then just tell the print head to move, and you should see it moving the Z. Even when you're not printing, it should move the Z when you're just tramming the head around the bed area.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
All right. Well, hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah, much appreciated.
No problem, John. Well, I appreciate you giving us a call, and wish you the best of luck on your printing.
Thanks.
All right, take it easy.
Thanks for doing. Bye.
No problem. All right. So we have it is only 2:30. We will go a little bit longer today. I'm really surprised. Should I put the call number back up on screen? Is it people don't want to go to the URL to get the information here? Oh yeah, the fade distance. Most people don't use fade, and if he's using our firmware like he said he is, you're not gonna have the fade enabled. We actually have it disabled because it's actually caused issues before. I don't know if it does with the newer version of Marlin, but it's been on and off where sometimes it works and doesn't cause issues, and other times it does. So we've just left it off in the firmware. It can also do weird things depending on how high people have the fade value set. If you're doing it over 2 millimeters, you can get some really weird results versus if you do it like 10. And then you get into like, okay, well, what if it's a small part? It's only a couple millimeters tall, and you're using a fade. Ugh, it might be weird. So, does anybody in chat have questions too? Let me go through chat here. Jerry Fuller, yeah, there are PoE hats for the Pi. I'm not a huge fan of those. I've heard that they overheat. I prefer to just have the standalone splitters. They've been working for us. For a while. Can use Octofarm if you set up a Pi that way. We actually use Octofarm to talk to the Pi. So Octofarm connects to the Raspberry Pis. That's how it works. So it's basically an aggregator for all your Pi setups. It's a central console to manage all your Raspberry Pi setups that are running Octoprint. Mason says, does the EasyBoard work with the BTT smart filament sensor? No, I have not tested it with that. Could it work? Possibly. Would I recommend it? No, I don't like connecting Big Tree Tech's parts to our boards because I've had their LCD screw our board up, and I don't trust the quality of their equipment. So I'm not going to be like, yeah, go ahead and use it, and then it fries it somehow. It's a neat idea, like a lot of their stuff. But the execution on their things leave a lot to be desired a lot of the times. I'm just pulling this up here. This is because I've seen this before. I know what you're talking about. Let me just pull this up here. Main monitor. There we go. I had to find the right button to press. So as far as I know, this has like an encoder inside. So it's neat because it can detect not only filament out, but it knows if it's moving. I believe this is they're showing a 3-pin here, but the connector's a 4-pin. I saw stuff in Marlin 2 that says they're working on it. Oh, old version, longer service life. Okay, so like their standard stuff. Let's sell you guys crap out of the get-go, and after a couple of versions, we'll get it right. And the early adopters can go pound sand. Okay, so it is a 3-pin connector. So, yeah, in theory it could be made to work, but we don't have support for it because I don't have one of these. And like I said, I'd be very wary to support something that they put out because I'm just not a big fan of their stuff because the quality's so hit and miss. Like you could get something that's really good and it works for a while, or you can get something that's really bad and could cause damage to the other parts of your machine. I don't know if they have. I think Marlin did have. Let's see. I think they have a definition for it. So I mean, you could. I mean, there's nothing stopping you from downloading Marlin and setting up your own stuff. But as far as our official firmware supporting it, the answer would be no. I don't know if they have. No, I don't think they have it in here. I may have been thinking of something else. This might be what I was thinking of here, because they have a motion option here. So, but oh, we got someone else coming in. So let's go ahead and switch back over. Got someone from 719 area code. Let's see who this is.
Joseph
is now joining.
Hey, Joseph, how's it going?
Hey, pretty good, Tim. How about you?
Not too bad. Your audio quality sounds really good for a phone call.
I'm using my headphones. I'm trying to remove as many issues as possible. I know how live streams can go.
Oh, yeah. It wouldn't be a live stream, though, if something didn't screw up.
Yeah, exactly.
So what question can I try to answer?
All right. So a little bit of background. I am a over-ambitious amateur. I just got into 3D printing a couple months ago, and I immediately fell down the rabbit hole of upgrading and looking for problems to solve with solutions. And one of them was installing 0.9 degree stepper motors. And they're calibrated, like the steps have been set up so dimensionally everything's fine. Pretty happy with the results that I'm getting, but I'm getting a lot of like motor noise. And I was trying to Google around, and I found some pretty advanced topics that were a little bit over my head. I've spent a decent amount inside Marlin, but I don't know if like I'm running into a resonance issue where because I've doubled my steps now and I print at a decently high speed that maybe I'm just not used to the motor noise, because I'm running a board, the SKR Mini E3 version 2. Mm-hmm. So originally on the stock motors, it was nice and quiet, but now with the new ones, it's a little louder, and I don't know if I need to tune something or if I've just introduced a new problem in my hunt for perfection.
So, in my opinion, I don't believe, especially for like the Cartesian machines, that the 0.9 degree, like I've swapped them out before. I ended up just going back because I didn't see a difference with the print quality. I don't understand. I think it's one of those things that people just do just to do it. You're not the first person I've heard or seen that's swapped them out for those. But the only difference between switching from the 1.8 to the 0.9 in terms of like software setup is just doubling your steps per millimeter. There's no other changes needed for that. But in terms of the noise of like your stepper motors essentially kind of function like a speaker. And when the stepper driver is basically, they typically run on a chopping frequency. So they're not actually varying the voltage, they're just turning the signal on and off very fast. And depending on the resistance of the coil and how fast the motor is being moved, and the voltage it's operating on, you can get certain motors that are louder on the same exact stepper drivers than others. I actually have a couple machines here where when the Trinamics originally came out, like back in the TMC 2100 line, which was like one of their first versions that kind of worked its way into the printing world. On 12 volts, the printer made this high-pitched noise that was just mind-numbing, but on 24 volts, those same exact motors, they were completely silent. So it does sound like you're coming into just a combination of the voltage and the drivers and the motors are putting that frequency into the audible range that you're hearing.
Gotcha.
That's really what it comes down to. In theory, the 0.9 degree stepper motors are more accurate, but in practice, I haven't, like if I swapped out the motors on this Ender 3 that's sitting next to me with 0.9 degree motors and did a print on both one and, showed them on, an HD camera and be like, hey, which one is the 0.9 and which one's the 1.8? I really doubt that anyone would be able, including myself, if I mixed them up, would be able to tell the difference between a print with 0.9 degree stepper motors versus 1.8 degree stepper motors. You get into a point where it's like diminishing returns. It's kind of like in the like in the home audio world, the difference between like a $500 set of speakers and ones that sound way better. You get to that point where it's like you have to spend thousands and thousands of dollars just to get a little bit better. It's kind of like with the same thing with the motors. You're not going to see a huge difference because your motors are being driven by stepper drivers that are also doing partial steps. So you've got 1.8 degrees per step on most of your printer stock motors, but your driver is also stepping at 1/16 of 1.8 degrees on most of your stepper drivers. Now, obviously, it varies depending on what stepper drivers people are using, but then you also throw the Trinamics in, which are then further smoothing that out, taking that 1/16 step rate and smoothing it out up to 1/256th of a step rate. So, you already got like stuff going on the software side and the driver side that are getting more resolution out of that motor. So putting a different motor on there with a finer step angle is really not going to do that much of a difference. You can run them, but you also end up running into where most of the 0.9 degree stepper motors that people are buying for their printers actually have less torque than the ones that came on the machine because that step angle is smaller, so they just naturally have less torque too. So I've seen a lot of people swap them out and they're like, well, I'm getting step loss now. Well, you either need to then increase the current going to the motor to drive it a little harder, but then you also start getting into the territory where the motors can start overheating because you're pushing too much current through them.
Right.
So
yeah, these are all great points. And I was looking for confirmation that, like I said, found a solution that was looking for a problem.
Yeah, and I mean, I totally get that. I've gone down those rabbit holes. I've been in that same position where, you're doing all this stuff. It's like, oh, well, this seems cool. And then you're going like, well, this really didn't make that much of a difference. I just kind of did it just to do it.
Yeah.
And that's fine, if it works for you. I'm just, giving you my honest feedback here. Like if you're to 800, so now your board's working even harder to deliver more steps per millimeter, which is then causing more CPU load, and then you're also cutting your torque down too. And you're also limiting how fast that Z-axis can move them, because at a certain point the motor will just stall out because, if you tell it to move like 15 millimeters a second on a 2-start, the motor just stalls on most machines. Whereas on a 4-start, you can go up to 15, even 20 millimeters a second, and that would come into play if you're doing like a Z probe, like the EasyABL or the, like the BL touches. You can't usually run that fast, but like our EasyABL, we can go up to 15 millimeters a second. And people were swapping their lead screws out for the 2-starts or the 1-starts, and they're like, well, the motor just stalls. It's like, yeah, you can't physically move it that fast. There's not enough torque.
Definitely. And what's funny? I also went down the lead screw hole.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to overcomplicate this as much as I can.
Okay. Sorry about that. My wife was telling me the stream keeps dropping, apparently.
It is a bit choppy. I don't know if it's on your end or just
I think it's YouTube. Is my audio coming through Teams sound good?
To me, through the conference call, it does.
Yeah.
I know on YouTube, it's a little bit of a slideshow right now.
I think it's probably YouTube. Yeah, because I'm actually looking here at my bit rate, and it usually hovers around 5,000, but it just dropped down to 2,000 as I'm sitting here watching it right now. But I would assume that it's not Comcast because the Teams audio, yours has sounded fine with no issues. So I'm gonna drop my bit rate down a little bit, and I'm gonna blame this on YouTube.
That's what I do. My stuff is fine.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not on my end, it's on your end. It wouldn't surprise me though.
Awesome.
YouTube's been kind of hit and miss. So hopefully I've given you some insight. At a certain point, when I started out, I used to mod the crap out of everything, and now I do a few little things. I'll throw a bed leveling kit on there. I'll get rid of my springs. I might maybe put a better extruder on there, swap the PTFE tubing out, and that's about it. There's, especially with the machines that are out these days, a lot of people never suffered through the ANET phase where Creality wasn't even in the picture. And you had to do a lot of modifications to get your printer to just function, but now you got printers like the Ender 3, and they're not perfect, but they're worlds better than what was out a couple years ago. And sometimes it's, there's people, like I said, they just do things to do it, and they don't realize that while they're technically upgrading the printer, it's just going to end up giving them either no difference at all or a difference so slight that it's not even visible. But then at the same time creating other problems for themselves down the road. And that's like, I can make a ton of money selling stepper motors that are 0.9 degrees and pitching everybody like, oh yeah, it's double the resolution. Yeah, technically that's true. Are you going to see it? Probably not. Same thing with the lead screws. There's, like I said, there's I believe the term is diminishing returns, and that's where we're at with these things. You got people that are not taking in consideration too that we have the, especially on the motor side, we have stepper drivers that are able to hold these motors in partial steps very accurately. So we're already getting more resolution than that 1.8 degrees out of there. And I think a lot of people do it because it's mostly bragging rights. I see a lot of these guys, well, I put the 0.9 degree steppers on here, and I did linear rails and all this other stuff, that's another thing that I never jumped on the bandwagon for, was the linear rails, because the V-slot, they're not perfect, but they're low cost, and as long as they're adjusted correctly, they're very accurate, but there are people that just like tinkering with things, and that's fine. But I've tried a lot of the things. I've built a couple of machines here with linear rails, and they're nice if the printer's originally designed around that. But all these retrofit kits, and I think Take Tech even did a video, is that there wasn't really any difference. The only real benefit to like linear rails is, there's less maintenance than V-slot wheels. But at the end of the day, the end result, you couldn't tell the difference. And
right. I've actually. I was going to say, I've actually seen a bunch of people who have gone down all those rabbit holes, and it's kind of like the more you constrain something, the more accurate everything else around it has to be, and the more you're going to find those issues. So it's like you fix one problem and then you exacerbate another one. So the systems the wheels have a built-in buffer for those imperfections, so it kind of soaks up all those vibrations and just makes the print overall smoother.
Yeah,
because I'm sure some people might get annoyed hearing this, but I try to remind myself it's a glorified hot glue gun.
It is
very precise, very complicated, but it's a hot glue gun.
Yeah, it's essentially it is. You could literally take a hot glue gun with a plunger and put it on here and just have a stepper driver push that plunger down. Yeah, you're not wrong. So
exactly. Awesome, Tim. Well, I mean, you've answered my questions, and I appreciate you doing these Q&As. It is great to be able to interact with you, and I'll often have them on in the background just to listen.
That's good to know. Well, I appreciate you calling in.
Awesome. Have a good one, Tim.
You too. Bye. Firmware work with the King Rune K KP3S. I've never heard of that one. He said it's a direct drive version. I did not know they came out with a new one. Let me just take a gander here at that machine. Let's see here. Let's share the monitor here. So at first glance, so I'm seeing the LCD screen is completely different. In terms of the orientation at the very least. Now, if it's the same hardware, just looking at this, let's assume that it's the same LCD screen. It's the let's assume it's the Robin Mini with the same exact screen, and they just change things out. Except I'm seeing 2225 drivers listed here, which either means no, because the old one was no. I don't think so, because this is gonna be a different board, because the one that came with it that was originally shipped was a they were soldered on drivers. Now I don't know if they switched them out. I believe they were 4988s on the original KP3, but it looks like I can buy a KP3S. So it's $150. You know what? We're gonna go order one of those. How's that? Let's go ahead and order one of those. I'll bite for $150. Let's see here. Let me see if I can get OBS to play nicely. Let's see. Let's start it back up. See if it's gonna connect. Are we reconnecting? Hopefully we reconnect. Wouldn't be a stream without something going wrong. Let's see, YouTube Studio. Let's see here. It says we're live still. We're only getting 15K, really? Says we're good. Are we good now? Let's see, I dropped it down to 30 frames a second. Let's see. Still the same bitrate, but dropped down to 30 frames per second. Are we good now? The weird thing, it's got to be YouTube, because Teams just was running fine. I didn't have any call drops or anything. Let's go back through the live chat here. I'm just going to run a quick speed test here and see what we're sitting at. Yeah, our connection is looking fine. It's got to be YouTube. It has to be YouTube. Check my modem here. Anyways. Oh, maybe it's Comcast, actually. Maybe it's both. Because my speed test looks good, but I am seeing uncorrected stuff and whatnot. Anyways, we're going to try to roll. I just restarted the recording here, so I can always splice this back together and re-upload it. We're at 30 frames per second now. We're not at 60 anymore. Let me do this. Let me drop down the bit rate too. Let's go to Potato Vision. I feel like I'm a console gamer here. Let's go to 3000K per second instead of 4. No, I don't have to restart the stream. The stream key can do 30 or 60. It doesn't matter. But we're just going to send it. Full send. I can re-upload this later. I'm recording it locally. So let's see. Let's see what live chat has to say. Let's see what you guys got going on here. Pop out chat. Let's see here. KP3. Okay, I was right here. Well, the KP3 will unify firmware with Kingroom KP3S. No, it will not. I will order one though. For $150, I'll buy one just to play with. And maybe we'll get firmware out of it. Maybe we won't. No promises, but I'll spend my hard-earned freedom bucks here and order one of those for $150. Sure, why not? I'll bite.